Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we're going to be talking about some random handheld consoles of the 90s. So the 90s had some very well-established consoles. It had some very well-established handhelds in the Game Gear and the Game Boy. But there were a lot of other handhelds in the 90s that people don't really talk about, mostly because they ain't got no games. But we're going to talk about them because that's what we do on this show. We talk about stuff.
We talk about the weird stuff, the neat stuff. Here we go. And we're going to start with the Turbo Express. Have you ever heard of that before?
It sounds like a train. Like, oh, I took the Turbo Express.
All aboard the Turbo Express.
Oh, yeah, you got to watch out. Turbo Express is always late, even though it's called Turbo.
It could be a train also. I feel like most consoles should also be able to be the names of trains, you know?
Yeah.
The GameCube, I don't know. The Wavebird.
I took the Super Nintendo. Oh, the Wavebird, that's good.
The Wavebird would be a great train name. Oh,
it's a water ferry,
totally.
The Wavebird. I took the Wavebird to Whidbey Island. It's fine.
I'm surprised that in Super Mario Sunshine you didn't take the Wavebird to another island or something. That would be fun. Okay, the Turbo Express was released on December 1st, 1990 in Japan, and then sometime in December 1990 in the US. I couldn't get an exact date. Essentially, it was a TurboGrafx 16 portable. So we talked about that console, the TurboGrafx 16, and this was capable of playing those games on what looked like a really bulky Game Boy. That's how I would describe it.
It played the same cartridges? Like
same cartridges, same games.
So it was like a Sega Nomad.
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly like a Sega Nomad. And so
cool. The
screen size was the same size as a Game Boy, but the difference was the Turbo Express was in full color. And it had turbo buttons on like underneath where the start buttons and stuff would be on a Game Boy. It really looked exactly like a Game Boy, essentially. The one problem with this console is if you wanted to buy it new, it was $249.99 US.
Oh, in a world where the Game Boy is $89.99?
Yeah.
It has games?
I mean, you were paying for a high quality system, but I mean, that's one of the weirdest things about this too. So I looked it up. When it came out, it was $249.99. And then in March of 1991, they raised the price briefly to $299.99. And they did this because the Turbo Express had a backlit display, and that screen technology cost a lot more than they thought, and they needed to make up cost, which I guess is fair, but $300 for a portable is insanity.
Wow,
as far as
incredible.
the price goes. Yeah. The coolest thing about the Turbo Express, though, is its code name. When it was being produced, it was called Game Tank.
Nice. I would play a Game Tank.
Right, they should just call it Game Tank. And also, the thing is huge. It looks like a Game Tank. They should have just kept the name. It had a link cable called the Turbo Link, and what you could do is you could play two-player games. I know a Turbo Express game that you could play was called Falcon. That was a flight simulator one. You could play Dogfight and your friends and stuff, which I think is pretty cool. The Turbo Vision, and this is probably one of the coolest accessories to any game console I've ever heard. And I don't know if you've ever heard of something like this before, Tyler, but here we go. The Turbo Vision was a TV tuner that attached to the side of the Express and used the Express's screen to display color TV.
Oh, the Game Gear had something like that too.
Really?
Yeah, and it just took in like the analog broadcast signals.
Yeah, like VHF, right? And UHF?
VHF,
yeah,
UHF.
So this had that, and you could get just signals out of the air, and you could just, I'm assuming you're just watching it while you're pooping. That's what everyone did, probably. You know, that's
pretty cool, I guess.
Don't want to miss the game.
Wouldn't work anymore. I don't think television's broadcast on those.
Yeah, I don't think
no more analog television broadcasts.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything you can get that at all. Maybe if you had like an HD antenna attachment, you could figure that out.
There you go. You could
cool.
get a converter box, I bet.
And like put it between or something.
Yeah.
Someone's probably done that in their spare time. Everyone's done everything on the internet. So you can actually use another thing about it has an AV jack on it. So you could just use the Turbo Express as a portable monitor also.
That's what you plug your HD receiver into then.
Oh yeah, the AV
plug
jack?
it straight in. That's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. So at the time, the reviews of this system were fair. as in okay, but the biggest complaint was from Computer Gaming World, where they said the Turbo Express, quote, gobbles power like crazy, almost forcing players to immediately purchase an AC adapter.
That was kind of a problem with some of those handhelds, especially the ones that were like color with backlit screens and like super high powered. Their battery life was bad.
Yeah. So it took 6 AA batteries. And if you're lucky, you got 3 hours out of those 6 AA batteries.
That's like Game Gear levels. That's basically what the Game Gear was too.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The console looked really cool, though. Like, I wanted to know more about it, and I Googled it, and I did my eBay check before the podcast started this time, listener. So isn't that great? And it was between $200 to $500 on eBay, depending on what you were looking. Like, if you just wanted the system used, it was probably like $200.
Wow. Is there like a community of people that really like it or something?
I think so. And the guy's video I watched to get a lot of this information, I think he's like Turbo Graphics Man or something like that. I should have really written this down, but
we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes unless I forget. And he was like really into these systems. You can tell he has a whole series on TurboGrafx, and it was really cool to like listen to him talk about it because he was so into it. And he even told like a story about how he couldn't find a TurboGrafx, and this was right when they dropped the price to like $200. And he went to Canada and he found one there, and that's where he bought his. So, and he even included a fun fact, a little pop culture fact about it, and it was, this system, the Turbo Express, is in the movie Enemy of the State, starring Will Smith and Gene Hackman. They use one in a car, I think, to pick up a radio signal, like a TV tuner.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, so they use the TV tuner.
They use the attachment.
Like it's the Sony Watchman. That was a portable TV.
What show was it?
The Sony Watchman. It was a portable TV thing that Sony made back in the day.
Oh,
just
wow.
like it's like that. I don't know.
It's just like that.
Yeah, that's what I don't know.
I will say though, I'm trying to find the guy's name right now because I don't want to take someone's amazing story about their. Oh, this is it. He's called his YouTube channel is SPIDA1A, and he just has a review. It's in Turbo Views is what it's called. It's what his like show is called. But yeah, he's really into TurboGrafx and those kind of consoles. So definitely check out his YouTube page if you want to know more. He's like so blissfully nerdy about it. It gets me excited for it. I'm into that kind of thing.
Those are the best YouTube channels.
Oh yeah, he's just so into this one thing, and he's really passionate about it. So check out his YouTube channel. Anyway, the next system is called the Gamate. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it was made in Taiwan by the Bit Corporation, but then it was manufactured and distributed by various companies across the world because it came out all over the world. And this was the first direct response to the Game Boy. And I couldn't find a release date for it. I want to say it was sometime in the year 1990 because the Game Boy came out in 89.
I like how there's like some systems just have you just can't tell when they came out. Like the NES is like what day was that launched in the United States? No one really knows.
Yeah, no one remembers. So it used the same screen as the Game Boy, essentially that green screen, but the layout of the buttons was on the right and left instead of below. So it kind of looked like a Game Gear, but with a Game Boy screen. And there were 70 games created for this system, and they were all called like Basketball or Devil Castle or Dinosaur Park, Galaxy Invaders. Like they were very much like the exact, like this is what the game is, I believe too that if I read correctly, it's not in the other system. I got to check this out real quick before I do it just to be sure. But this one was, so this system had 2 different essentially screens that they used when they manufactured this system. And the first screen, this was like the only interesting fact I could find about it. You could tell what kind of screen you had based off of turning on the system with no game cartridge in it. If it had vertical stripes when you turn on the game system with no cartridge, that meant it was the bad kind of screen, like the less quality. And if it did a checkerboard, that means it was the good one. So that's the way you could tell. But essentially, this was just a rushed response to the Game Boy. Never really picked up anywhere. I'm sure some people owned it, but it did not gain popularity. It's very much, and you can even tell by looking at just the Wikipedia page for it, that there's not a lot on this system. So there's that. There's the Gamate. But now we're going to get to the big one. The big one here. of the other handhelds that are not Game Boy in the 1990s, and that is the Sega Game Gear.
Woohoo!
I always thought this one was really cool. This is the one I always
like
wish
Sega
I owned.
Game Gear.
Yeah, so this was developed by Sega under the codename Project Mercury, which is really cool.
They had all their stuff was planet named back in the day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Saturn was released as a Saturn. They had like a Project Mars at one point. They had, I think they had a Venus and a Jupiter.
Oh, dang. That's cool.
And a Neptune as well. I think Neptune
was
was
the
supposed to
Neptune?
be the Neptune was supposed to be a Sega CD, Sega Genesis, and 32X all in one console. I think that's what Neptune was.
That's a lot.
Maybe that was Mars. I'm gonna Google that real quick. Yeah, Sega Neptune was all things. Anyway, they did all their code names based on planets back in the day.
That's awesome. I will say, the Game Gear, to give you some facts about it, was first released in Japan on October 6, 1990, then in North America and Europe in 1991. And finally, it was released in Australia in 1992, because we all know Australia really gets the shaft when it comes to video game releases. And I feel bad for them, and I'm sorry, Australia, but it always happens that way. The price at release was $149.99, just again to show you how ridiculous the Turbo Express price was. This is essentially, I mean, it wasn't as powerful as the Turbo Express, the system, but it did color games with like really good graphics that were like, it was essentially a portable Sega Master System is what the Game Gear was. And what's great about it is it had that full color screen, and the Game Gear supported 4,096 colors. Meanwhile, the Master System supported 64 colors. So this was like a huge upgrade. So if you owned a Master System, you probably felt really bad when the Game Gear came out because it was so superior to your console. You could not play Master System games on the Game Gear unless you had a special attachment. That's something that's important to note too.
That's pretty cool that they're close enough in hardware that like even just with an attachment you can straight up play Master System games on it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. I again, Sega was great about letting people use their old stuff. Like I feel like they were pretty good about it as far as backwards compatibility goes. They always had some sort of adapter. So the people at Sega shaped the Game Gear to look like a Genesis controller on purpose because they thought it would feel more comfortable than playing just a Game Boy, which I think is kind of true, having the rounded out controller feel. You know, I think I like that personally. Also, the pack-in game that came with the console was called Columns, and it was 100% a ripoff of Tetris. But like we said in our old episodes, Nintendo had the rights to handheld Tetris. Which, again, Sega didn't, but they could make a game called Columns that was very similar with some minor changes, and that's what they did. So, much like the Turbo Express, the Game Gear had all of its power, and it used all of its power really poorly. I will say that. For comparison, the Nintendo Game Boy could run more than 30 hours on 4 AA batteries. The Game Gear ran for 3 to 5 hours on 6 AA batteries.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's really bad in comparison. But again, the Game Boy had that green screen that just took no power. It all lasted forever. Gosh, the original Game Boy was really awesome. So the system had a very quick launch. Sega was behind in the market since Game Boy came out in 89 and this came out in 1990. So they had some catching up to do. So they really rushed out the release. Like, here, we got this new thing. It's awesome. Full color. Look at this, right? In Japan, they sold 40,000 units in the first 2 days, followed up by 90,000 units total within a month. And then the number of back orders for the system was over 600,000 at one point.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so they really crushed it. And the problem with this, though, and the Game Gear in general, was the life cycle ended because of Sega's willingness to juggle way too many systems at one time. We've talked about this before when it came to the Master System and the Genesis and the Saturn. Sega did the exact same thing, but this time they did it with the Game Gear. So they had the Game Gear, and then while they were doing, in the middle of the Game Gear's life cycle, they released a 16-bit portable called the Sega Nomad. And on top of the other systems they had going at the time, including the Saturn, the Genesis, all this stuff, they had the Nomad. And that really bogged down everything. And Sega at first was like, hey, we're going to have the Nomad, but we're still going to support the Game Gear. Like, they could coexist together. And if anyone has been listening to this podcast for more than 10 episodes knows, that is not true. With the one company, they always eventually abandon the old system. So they abandoned the Game Gear in 1997. They stopped manufacturing it, and then they stopped making games for it. But something really cool happened.
The story doesn't end there?
No, it doesn't end there, because there was a company called Majesco. And this is the story. I got this from an IGN article called, quote, "Remember the Game Gear?" So this is just exactly from the article. I'm going to read it as a quote, as is. In 2000, Majesco released a budget refresh of the Game Gear that looked almost exactly like the original machine, but with cheaper materials and a slightly better screen. Majesco also released a number of inexpensive Game Gear games, such as The Jungle Book and Sonic Spinball, to support the refresh. Although the handheld would still support classic Game Gear games. So the short-lived experiment was concentrated at Toys R Us, with the new Game Gear selling for only $30.
Whoa.
And each game just shy of $15. End quote. So that's from that article. So essentially, I don't know how Majesco did this. They got the rights to the Game Gear. They released it for $30, and then they sold games for $15 in the year 2000. That's such a good deal. It's crazy.
Yeah. I kind of want to buy one right now.
Right? I wonder if you could find a Majesco Game Gear. I didn't look that up. I'm sure you can. So
yeah, probably.
The Game Gear had some great games. It had all the Sonic games on it, so that's a pretty big deal. But
they were the same as the Master System version of those games too. That's kind of a fun fact, is that the Master System got Sonic games at the same time.
Yeah.
As the Genesis, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, because I remember Sonic being on the Genesis, not even being on the Master System, because I never had a Master System. But I found the best game in quotes for the system, like the best reviewed game for Game Gear, because we don't have a lot of time to go through all the games. And the best critiqued game for the Game Gear was a Disney game called Land of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse.
Ooh.
And essentially, you're Mickey Mouse. You got a storybook of fairy tales. You fall asleep. You then wake up in a world where fairy tale villagers, led by Daisy Duck, inform you that the crystal from the village has been stolen that protects their village. And so Mickey's got to go find it. And the game was a platformer where you jump through these levels, and there were 14 stages. But the cool part is you would get special abilities that you could unlock. Then you could then go back to the older stages and get more stuff. So it was kind of like a Metroid style go backwards kind of thing.
That's cool.
And there were 14 power stars, and you would get 5 of those, and that would increase your health each time you got one. And it maxed out at 5. So then the other 9, if you got them, they just helped your score at the end of the game, and they filled your health. So it was pretty cool game, I think. Sounds cool. I kind of want to play it.
Yeah, I would check it out if I had a Game Gear.
Yeah, maybe I guess some Majescos, and do that thing.
Those are the cheap Game Gears, but with good screens.
Exactly. I want that better screen, and I want it for $30.
Yep.
All right, you got the next one, Tyler?
Yeah, I want to talk about the Neo Geo Pocket. Very closely related to the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Okay, so context here. In 1990, SNK released the Neo Geo, which was an arcade system that was popular with, I'm saying customers here, not necessarily players, but customers as in the kind of people like bars and stuff that buy arcade machines. But it was popular with those folks because it had easily replaceable games. So you could kind of swap games in and out of it. So it was cool because you could just buy the cabinet and then buy the game separately for it, and you could always have new games for cheaper. But they also released a home console version of the Neo Geo, which was basically the exact same thing as what was in those arcade machines, just in a console format that took cartridges. So that meant that a home console version of a Neo Geo game was basically exactly the same as the arcade version. So, and in the 90s, you wanted your stuff to be arcade quality.
That's really cool.
That's the context on Neo Geo. I think we talked about it a little bit before, but I just wanted to set sort of that context. Fun fact about the Neo Geo, it is the longest running arcade hardware, being in use from 1990 to 2004, which is pretty good in the video game world. But in the late 90s, SNK wanted in on this handheld craze. So in Japan, they released the Neo Geo Pocket to compete with the Game Boy. It had a 16-bit processor. It had one 16-bit processor, and then it also had the same 8-bit processor that the Game Boy had, or the Game Boy Color had.
The Zilog.
The Zilog Z80. It had a 2.7-inch screen, 160 by 152 resolution, which could show 146 colors on screen out of a palette of 496 colors, and it got 40 hours of battery life on just two AA's. Yeah.
And it had color screen?
The Neo Geo Pocket didn't have a color screen, but they would soon release a color version not 5 months later because Game Boy Color had come out. So they put out this black and white machine, and then they put out the color version like almost immediately afterwards. And it was basically the same machine. It just had a color screen. The non-color Neo Geo Pocket never came out in the United States, mostly because they had already replaced it with the color version in Japan. The Neo Geo Pocket Color didn't do so hot for a number of reasons. Number one, it got no games. If you look at the released games list, it shows that basically just SNK was making games for this thing. They made a lot of games, and they made a lot of pretty high quality ports of their arcade games. Well, high quality like handheld versions of their arcade games. So people really liked those. If you really like those arcade games, you could kind of get portable versions of those games that were pretty faithful. But it really was just SNK making games for the thing. There were a few smaller publishers that made some games, but there wasn't any game on there that was really like the killer app that was like, oh, you gotta buy a Neo Geo Pocket because you want to play this game. It was like there was just no good games for it.
Ain't got no games.
SNK is not Nintendo, so like when you look at like a Nintendo console and you just see Nintendo games released for it, you go, yeah, but it's Nintendo. All those games are awesome. SNK didn't quite have that same reputation, so them being the only ones to make games for the thing just kind of signaled lack of developer confidence in it. But Sega did contribute to the Neo Geo Pocket. Around this time, they were kind of playing with some, with like if they should put Sonic on other systems, probably because they were feeling out, end of life for Dreamcast. So they put out Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, which was kind of an adaptation of Sonic 2 for the Genesis. It had like all the same like themes of the stages, but the stages themselves were all new. And the team at SNK that developed that game, so SNK did develop that game, and I think Sega published it. But anyway, the team at SNK that worked on that game eventually formed a company called Dimps, which would go on to make those awesome Sonic Advance games we talked about a couple shows back or on the last show.
Wow. That goes full circle.
Yeah, they kind of got their start making Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure, and then they went on and made more for the Game Boy, which was pretty cool. That's about it for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. It didn't last very long, ain't got no games, and that's pretty much it.
That's the way it works. Okay, last real, I'm gonna say real system to be really insulting to the last thing we talk about on here, because you and I are bitter about the last thing we talk about on here.
Yeah.
But the one before that is called the Watara Supervision, and it was built, and it's probably the most successful handheld to compete with the Game Gear and Game Boy. It was released in 1992 and was known as the Quickshot Supervision if it was released in the UK. But the console had a green screen like the Game Boy, but what made it stand apart is its second iteration. There were two versions of it, and the second version had a hinge, so it was like foldable. It looked kind of like a flip phone. It was kind of cool,
like a Game Boy Advance SP.
Yeah, before the Game Boy Advance SP, it was that. So one unique feature of the Supervision was that it could be linked up to a TV via a link cable, and games that played that way would display in 4 colors. So it was kind of like Nintendo's Super Game Boy add-on for the SNES. So it was very similar to that. And there was going to be a full color TV link in development, but then because the Supervision really didn't do anything as far as money and successful sales, they canceled it. So along with all the games they had planned for that full color TV link, which is kind of a bummer. Because once again, the main problem with the Supervision, it ain't got no games. The games were developed by unknown game studios in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and they just could not compete with the names of the Sega and Nintendo titles like Sonic or Mario or Castlevania or whatever game you want to think of that you all know and love that came out on those consoles. They just couldn't compete. So I couldn't even find a lot about the game specifically. They listed 65 on the Wikipedia page. None of them had like articles attached to them. Like no one's even bothered. So somewhere out there, if there is a Watara Supervision super fan, you got some work to do. Okay, you got to go to Wikipedia and you got to make that awesome. Okay. But for now, if you want to play the Watara Supervision or the Turbo Express games, and you don't want to buy this console for way too much money on eBay, there is an emulator called MESS, which stands for Multi-Emulator Super System. And they have 69 games for the Supervision you can play, and even more than that for the Turbo Express you can play. So if you're like, I want to play these games, but I don't want to pay money, well, hey, I just found your answer. And that is all for the Watara Supervision. So,
Of course, you should only use those to play your legally purchased copies of these games.
of course. I mean, obviously, we all bought the games. So
Right. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about on this list that I think we would be missing a huge part of the 90s if we didn't talk about these things.
Everyone had one, I think.
Every single person had one of these, which is why they did so well. Nobody liked them. Those Tiger handhelds, LCD games from the 90s, there were so many of them. And they were like, I want to say probably like 3 inches tall, or 4 by 3 inches probably. And you held them in your hands like a Game Boy Advance, kind of with the screen in the middle, but they had a really crappy background for the screen, and then the LCD was just like little things that would light up, kind of like an old clock, like an old LCD clock, you know?
It's like a Mr. Game & Watch almost.
Yeah, it was similar to a Game & Watch, only 20 years later. It was they were like really, really cheap, low quality games. You had to buy them separately. So if you wanted to have 5 of these games, it wasn't like cartridges you could swap in and out. You just had to buy 5 of these giant handhelds. But what they did do was they licensed popular franchises of the time. So you got your Batman, you got your all kinds of games from all kinds of different franchises like RoboCop and Terminator, and whatever was hot at the time it had a Tiger handheld game. I had one that was Spider-Man, and I still remember the stupid song that it used to play that was so annoying that my dad made me turn the sound off on this thing because it was just awful. And the game was not very good, but every kid wanted these things because they were bright and colorful and because they had their favorite characters on them. So Tiger really, really proved that you can do a lot with marketing if you license things out.
Dude, I found it. I found the one I had.
Oh, which one did you have?
The Batman the Animated Series one. It had Batman on the left side, like punching and running, and then it had the Joker, Poison Ivy, and Riddler on the other side, and the background was just like the Gotham cityscape. And man, it was so bad. I played it a lot because I just, again, like, you're a kid and you just love video games, so you just want to play anything that you have. But I think I might still even have it. I might still have it somewhere. I kind of hope I do, because on eBay it goes for $20 used, you know?
Oh, hey. That's how much it cost in 1990, probably.
Yeah, I could recoup my investment. This was also a very popular, because again, I don't like what they did because the games were not very great, but the reason I got these is because I had sweet relatives, like my grandparents or my aunt and uncles, that didn't really understand video games, and they would get these for you. And I feel like that's something that was nice about the system, is I want to be like, thank you, Grandma, for getting this for me, because it's very sweet of you to do. And I think one time, it's not a Tiger, but I got a game system that was one of those ones that had like 200 games on it, you know? And it had like Snake and all that stuff.
4 different variations of Snake, which counts as 4 games. Exactly.
And I got one of those from my grandmother on my Nana on my dad's side, and I did play that thing a lot. So in a way, it's like, hey, if you were a kid, this probably meant something to you. You know, it kind of did. It like formed a part of your childhood. But I think looking back on it, especially now that what video games are, I'm like, this is 100% a money grab, like a real big money grab.
For sure. but yeah, it was nice because you could say, like, Grandma knows I like Spider-Man and she knows I like video games. So when she sees a Spider-Man video game that she knows she's not buying like the wrong cartridge for the wrong system, she can just buy this and know it's going to work. Thanks, Grandma. It means a lot. You know? So I played Spider-Man.
Yeah, but she's like shopping around at Sears and she looks next to the cashier stand and she sees a bunch of Tiger Electronics thing hanging out. I now want to go on YouTube and see if I can find a guy who collects these. It's gotta be.
There was somebody that I had found that reviewed a lot of these. So yeah, you can find somebody who knows what's up here.
Oh, awesome.
One thing that I wanted to say about the Tiger handhelds, I think they're the reason that other handhelds besides the Nintendo and Sega ones just couldn't compete because the market was flooded with so many of these like junk handhelds that it became like, if you were a consumer trying to decide which handheld to buy, it became this just like so many choices that you just went like, look, I don't know, I'm just going to go with Nintendo or Sega because I got a Nintendo or a Sega sitting under my TV. I know they make good stuff. I'm going to buy that. And so like our Neo Geos couldn't really do anything because they didn't have quite the brand recognition. The Supervision couldn't do anything because it didn't have that same kind of like brand recognition. And I think the reason is because Tiger just made it so that choosing a handheld was so hard.
Yeah, it just flooded the market too much. I completely agree with you. Oh, by the way, one thing I think Tyler agrees with me here. I am not including Tamagotchis or Gigapets in this list for a very distinct reason, and that is those are wonderful and they deserve their own episode. Whether it's a 15-minute episode or not, I'm not sure, but we got stuff to talk about when it comes to Gigapets and Tamagotchis. I want to do a separate episode on those because I love them so much.
They brought back the Tamagotchi, I think. Sort of recently.
Yeah, I told you because my friend bought one for his niece. And I was like, that's awesome. He even showed it to me. I was visiting him and I saw it and I'm like, dude, you just getting into Tamagotchis in your spare time without telling me? Is that what's happening? He's like, yeah, they sell them again. He got like really excited. So, man, I want to talk about those at a later time because I got so many fond memories of just kids with like 30 keychains of Tamagotchis walking into school.
Taking care of all of them, making sure they all stay alive.
Oh, yeah. Just constantly like hearing the beeps and boop sounds that happen.
Yeah. Getting them taken away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Teachers. That was a big thing. That, and then I get my Pokemon cards taken away. Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Oh, man. For like 1998, 1999, recess was just Pokemon cards. That's
it was all Pokemon cards. I loved it, though. What a better time, you know?
What a time to be alive.
What a time. And it probably still is. Okay. That's all for the episode today. It's a little bit shorter. Apologies for that. Okay. But yeah, it's fine. We just want to see if this has legs or not. We're going to look, see if people listen to this episode. If they do, great. If not, we may not go into the late 90s. We might not do that. Maybe way down the road. I don't know. But as always, you can find Tyler at SneakerElf, ELPH on Twitter. You can find me at Micoletta on Twitter. CodexHistoryPodcast@gmail.com is where you can email us if we missed your favorite dumb unknown handheld from the early 1990s. Please let us know. And finally, you could give us a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, and that would mean the world to us. And we got a new review.
Woohoo!
Let me read it for you. This is from RoccoW Waffles. Thank you, RoccoW Waffles. Enjoyable. It's comforting to listen to fellow Jaybird enthusiasts talk about what they know best. Jaybird. Thank you, RoccoW Waffles. Thank you. And you're invited to the JBCS. That's the Jaybird Championship Series that Tyler and I are trying to get started. So
yeah, we're searching for investors now, but we're pretty hopeful that we can stand up a league.
I think it, dare I say, will be bigger than Fortnite. You know?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm telling people because I need them to invest. But yeah, I think so too. This thing's got legs for sure.
This might be our Fire Festival.
Oh God, no.
But anyway, thank you all so much for listening. Do you want to say bye to the audience, Tyler?
Yeah, bye, audience.
This has been a Podaholics Comedy Network presentation. Podaholics.com